If we're honest, most of us have treated food like a pharmacist treats a prescription. We don't just eat because our stomachs are empty. We eat because our hearts are heavy, our schedules are crushing, or our boundaries are broken. We use food to numb the quiet panic of a Tuesday afternoon, to celebrate a victory when no one else is cheering, or to wrap around ourselves like a heavy blanket when the house gets too quiet. For generations, the culture has told you that emotional eating is a flaw of discipline. They told you it's a lack of willpower or a sign of spiritual laziness. But tonight, we are exposing that lie. Emotional eating is rarely about weakness. It is almost always about wounds. It is an intelligent, survival driven coping mechanism to handle an internal storm you weren't equipped to process. Tonight, we aren't talking about diets, points, or scales. We are having a raw, clinical, and spiritual grounded conversation about how we reclaim the temples God entrusted to us, not through punishment, but through deep, lasting healing. So, welcome to the Majestic Talks Show. I'm your host, Coach Latasha Morgan, and tonight we are diving into one of the most critical installments of our season 6 journey, healing the temple. Now, our focus tonight is food, faith, and feelings, understanding emotional eating. This is a zero shame, maximum grace environment. We are pulling back the curtain on the silent struggles so many of you carry in the pantry late at night. And to help us navigate this complex intersection of the human mind, let's welcome Dr. Luther Smith.
Thank
Hello,
you.
Dr. Smith. How are
Thank you.
you?
Thank you very much for having that was a wow, man, that was a fantastic intro. Excellent.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm glad to have you here. So, before we break down the clinical science and the scriptural truths tonight, I want to ground our audience in your why. You sit at the very unique audience in your why.
Well, just a little bit about me, if that's what you're inquiring. So, my name is Dr. Luther Smith. I am the department chair of biblical counseling, as well as the undergrad program director of the same program at a Calvary University, a small private school, Christian private school in Kansas City, Missouri.
Hmm.
I also host the Renewed Mind podcast. We are about 68 episodes in, which basically harmonizes and looks at counseling, psychology, and the scriptures. We seek to harmonize those three subjects. And so we do interviews, we do deep dives, and we even do reactions to certain videos and things like that, pulling back the misconceptions of psychology and the scriptures, right? At the same time, I have a biblical counseling center here in Kansas City, Missouri, known as New Mind Biblical Counseling Center, and we have been operative for about 5 years, actually a little over 5 years, which
Mhm.
has been pretty neat as well. So we try to do all things here, looking at mental health, but looking at it, striving to look at it from a biblical lens, which is very unique. So that's kind of what my specialty is.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. And again, thank you for being here. I'm glad you're here. And
Thank
that's amazing. So, when people look at you, Dr. Luther, they see the success. But take us behind the degrees. What was the catalyst that made you realize clinical psychology was your calling?
Well, I kind of tell people that it wasn't. What happened was is I was actually studying to become a secondary ed teacher. Was
Hmm.
either going to enter and do creative writing or English, or go into mathematics. That was kind of my pursuit. And within my classes, particularly my secondary ed classes that I was taking within community college at the time, I had an opportunity to take intro to psychology. And it was one of my first times being exposed to this particular material, and I became fascinated at human behavior, that we were able to observe and track human behavior, right? And looking at theories and models and things like that. And I became so intrigued with it. And my teacher at the time, who was a Christian, taught the class. She was a short little woman. And at the end of the class, I used to like to thank my teachers for teaching. And so I went up and thanked her. And she asked me, she said, what are you going to do? Like, what are you looking to do? Where are you going after this? And I said, well, I'm going to get my credentials and become a secondary ed teacher. And she goes, can I, can I submit something to you? And I said, sure. She goes, don't do that. I'm like, don't do that. Like, what? What are you talking about? And she goes, you got the highest grade in the class. You participate in all of the discussions. You're always asking questions about the material. There's not a time that your hand did not go up where you didn't have a question. And she's like, you honestly love this material. And I said, okay. And she goes, have you ever considered doing this? And I said, no. And she goes, look, she goes, and you're a Christian, right? And I said, yes, I am. She goes, well, that's good because I'm a Christian also. And she goes, at the time that she told me this, she goes, there's not many Christians in our field, and they don't like us very much. And she goes, will you do me a favor? I said, sure. She goes, you probably will never see me again. And she goes, that's fine. She goes, but I want you to spend the weekend and really think about it. Really think about going into this field, you know. And if you decide, after the weekend thinking about it, praying about it, that, you want to continue and go on and be a teacher, then that's fine. She goes, but I would really consider that you consider this. And that's what I did. And thought about it for the weekend. And then 14, 15 years later, here we are. So that's what gave me the passion to pursue this particular subject and this discipline.
Okay, that's good. That's good because it made me think about doing my pastoral counseling, one of my classes. Um, had gone to the seminary for my Master of Divinity, and one of my professors told me, "Don't go back into the seminary." I plan on going back,
Uh,
but he
uh,
said that. And I thought that was strange that you said a teacher told you that as well. And the thing is, I never considered coaching to be something that I would do.
mm,
And ministry, I always said, oh, no, I'd never do that. Because I never wanted to listen and hear people problems. Because I always thought that people in the church love the wine. Some people love the wine too much. And that I never wanted to do that, but here we are, right?
mhm. Yes,
Doing something we never
yes.
wanted to do. I
That's
never.
I'm sorry. That's interesting that you say that because I am not empathetic by nature. So when
Hmm.
people would come to me and tell me about their problems, I'm like, go do something about it. Like, what are you telling me for? Right?
Yeah.
But through this process, I have learned how to be more empathetic and connect, which I didn't think I was able to do otherwise. So, yeah, it's a stretching exercise for sure.
Me either. I never. I mean, I understand completely because I wasn't made like that either. I'm
Mm,
like, I would be thinking the same thing you would be thinking. But it's so great though that we can actually do it now. We can. I think that that's a strength though, because we are not always so consumed with the feelings or what people are going to think, or we're able to help people and lift them up despite anything else. So we're not sitting there babying them. We're actually there helping them to move forward.
hmm Yeah.
So I think that's a strength that we have, that we're not made to be so empathetic all the time. Yeah. I think because we're very intellectual, that may be why.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I've had some of my counselees tell me, you're kind of more like a professor. I was like, well, I do have professor skills,
Hmm.
and I do incorporate them in counseling from time to time. But yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. Yeah.
Yeah. In your practice, you look at patients through a whole person's lens. Why do you believe we fail to achieve lasting physical health if we refuse to address our emotional and spiritual architecture?
That's a great question. And there's lots of facets to that particular question. I think one of the main challenges is that, particularly for us as believers, but I'll just say just the populace at large, and even our culture in the West, we have a very hard time looking at emotions as neither positive or nor negative. They are something that is just part of the human experience.
Mhm.
And I know that, based upon some of the culture and some of the things that are happening right now, we kind of teach that, facts don't care about your feelings, or if you're in your feelings, then you're an immature person, or
Mhm.
if you're letting your feelings lead you, well, then you're not a real man, or whatever the case is, right? But emotions and feelings themselves are how we are designed, right? And maybe it's not necessarily the fact that feelings are positive or negative. It's just that we may not have the proper information, not only to observe them in a proper sense, but also learn how to manage them. I tell counselees all the time, your feelings serve you. um your feelings are not sentient. They don't have like their own brain or their own mind, right? Your feelings are not trying to take you over. Your feelings are trying to inform you about something. So if you look at your feelings like that, instead of these are bad feelings that I need to suppress, instead of looking at it like that and asking the question, what are my feelings communicating to me? What are they telling me about myself? What are they telling me about my thoughts, my thinking? What are they telling me about my perception? I think that we would have a much better experience in managing our feelings and learning how to control them, than just acting like they're out to get us, or they're a source of derision, or conflict.
Okay, yeah. So, how has your personal walk with God shaped the way you sit across from a patient who feels utterly disqualified by their coping habits or addiction?
So my I always seek to, when I counsel individuals, I always try to um, give room for the scriptures to influence the way that I approach counselees. I think that as a counselor working from a biblical perspective, since the scriptures are the authority by which I seek to view life and view individuals, and walk in accordance with that, I think that that's very important for my ethic. And one of the things that helps center me when I'm sitting across from an individual and they've shamed themselves in this way is to see them, first of all, as a person who is made in the image of God. And that this individual, even though they might be having difficulties and struggles, that doesn't take away from their inherent worth or their value, right? I believe that the culture has it backwards, that we tend to view people's value based upon what they do, what they produce,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I believe that in the scriptures, particularly in Genesis 1 and other places, that God shows us and instructs us that people are valuable based upon not only how they are created, but who they are created by, right?
Mm-hmm.
That bear God's image. And so I always try to, irrespective of what the person has gone through, their struggles, or their afflictions, things like that is troubling them, I always seek to approach them from that position, with an inherent level of respect. Also, too, I think that it is it, and us being in different types of areas of counseling and advising, I think it is very, very important that we understand that we have a very, very deep privilege of having individuals who do not know us from Adam,
Mm-hmm.
who are coming to us and telling us things that they haven't even told even some of their spouses and their
Mm-hmm.
family members, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
find that to be an incredible honor and a privilege,
Mm-hmm.
that they're coming to me, even though they don't know who I am, to disclose something that is very deep and grievous and troublesome to them that they want help in. And so those two things assist me. And of course, if they're a believer in Christ, they're a fellow brother and sister. They are part of our family. So
Mm-hmm.
that even adds another layer of connection that I have with them, and those things kind of guide and guide me to ask them questions, to dig a little deeper, to confront them in a way that is respectful, and to help them, hopefully give them tools and strategies that would be able to help them in what ails them and the problems and struggles they're having.
That's amazing. That is so good. And that's exactly how we should operate in the church as a whole, and just in every way, in every part of the world. We need to operate that way because they are just people. We are all people and we all have issues, really. So we know a lot about you, Dr. Luther. So we're going to get started into our agenda for tonight. We're going to have three different sessions, okay? So, how do we get here? Where are we now? And how can we move forward and heal? So, let's start by shifting the paradigm. When someone finds themselves standing in front of an open refrigerator at 11 o'clock p.m., completely disconnected from their physical hunger. There is a complex biological and psychological narrative unfolding. Let's talk about how we actually got here. And I love to that. This is not a coaching session, like I told you, Dr. Smith, but I like to structure it around that way because if we don't know how we got here, how are we going to move forward?
Mm, yeah, yeah.
All right. So, all right. So, the biological and clinical grounding here. The chronic cortisol loop. When the brain perceives chronic emotional distress like grief, unexpressed anger, systematic burnout, and we all have that sometimes. The adrenal glands flood the body with cortisol, and cortisol actively signals the brain to seek out calorie dense, high sugar, and hyperpalatable foods. It is not an erratic craving. It is a psychological survival response. And the dopamine dopedom, refined carbohydrates and sugars induce a rapid surge of dopamine into the nucleus accumbens, the reward center of the brain, for a brief 15 to 20-minute window. Highly processed food mechanically overrides stress hormones, creating a literal chemical counterfeit of peace. Now, how often do most of us actually experience that? You're experiencing that at least 15 to 20, within a 15 to 20-minute window. I didn't know anything about that until I actually researched it.
Mhm.
And the cultural blueprint is like from childhood, food is weaponized as an emotional currency. We soothe crying children with sugary snacks. We celebrate academic benchmarks with heavy meals. And we gather in grief around carousel. Oh, Lord, I say casseroles. I mean, well, maybe somebody is doing around a carousel.
Mhm.
Over decades, neural pathways become deeply grooved to to equate the consumption of specific foods with systematic safety, maternal comfort, and emotional regulation. So, I have a story for you. We're going to talk about Denise. And like I told you, Dr. Smith, I like to use stories so people can see themselves in the story because unless they can see themselves, they can't really change, right? We can talk about it all day, but if we don't show them something that they can see, then they won't see, will they? So, I want to introduce you to a woman named Denise. To the outside world, Denise is an absolute powerhouse. She's an executive at her firm. She chairs the hospitality ministry at her church. She answers every text message within 4 minutes. And she is a primary emotional anchor for her aging parents and her teenage kids. She is hyper responsible. Everyone relies on her strength, but Denise has an unspoken rule. She is not allowed to have needs. Every night, after the emails are answered, the house is locked down and the world goes completely dark. Denise stands by the kitchen counter. She doesn't even sit down. She eats directly from a premium container of ice cream with a heavy silver spoon. Oh, it sounds good. In those 10 minutes, the ice cream isn't just dessert, it is the only space in Denise's entire 24-hour day where she doesn't have to perform. It is the only thing catering to her. It is her boundary against a world that demands too much of her. But the moment the spoon hits the bottom of the cart, a devastating wave of shame crashes in. She hides the container at the very bottom of the recycling bin, goes to bed, and promises she will do better tomorrow, unknowingly setting herself up to repeat the exact same loop. So, Dr. Smith, in listening to that story about Denise, she isn't eating because she lacks discipline. She is an incredibly disciplined woman everywhere else, but psychologically. How does hyperperformance and the suppression of our own needs create a direct path to emotional overeating?
That is a great, again, another great intro and a great, great, great question. So, as you were going through some of the physiological kind of responses and reactions that occur when individuals are dealing with such things, right? Addictions, really. We have, let's rewind a little bit back and talk a little bit about some of the biological and fill in some more of the physiological things that are happening within the center of the brain. We call this the hindbrain. There is a brain organ known as the amygdala. The amygdala is part of what's known as the limbic system. The limbic system is the emotional center of the brain, which carries with it four responses, right? Your fight or flight response, your freeze response, your shock response, right? And it's also involved or responsible in the area of attraction and things like that. So what happens is when individuals are stressed, right, and they are overwhelmed. In this case, Denise, I believe, is she's relieving everybody else's pressure but herself,
Mhm.
right? And so when the amygdala goes off, what there's a fascinating phenomenon that happens. Okay, the responsibility or the responsibility of the amygdala is the amygdala essentially the amygdala's only job is to go around all the other parts of the brain and ask them if they're okay. That's it, right? Are you all right? Are you okay? Are you okay? Right? When the amygdala senses by the person's awareness if things are not okay, the amygdala rings the bell. Now, what happens when that happens is the frontal lobe, which is responsible for thinking. This part here, responsible for thinking, planning, strategizing, things like that. That area of the brain decreases in.
Mhm.
And so when an individual is overwhelmed, or when we call it emotional eating, but technically it's stress eating. Okay. That's really what we're talking about here, that state of being of stress. When a person is overwhelmed and the amygdala is firing, and and the person is overwhelmed, right? They go to the one only thing or the next best thing to cope, right? And that particular coping strategy in this case is eating, specifically high dense caloric foods and things like that. That is where the cortisol levels spike up, because due to that amygdala going off, there's a whole bunch of hormones and stuff that are released within the bloodstream. You have not just the release of cortisol, but epinephrine, norepinephrine, and all of that, and all of those kind of those hormones that are released into the bloodstream, and that impacts a person and how they eat and consume. So we're really talking about stress eating in terms of the biological nature of what goes on and how a person copes and deals with that overwhelming sense of stress. And it seems like we've lost our host. We are live on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. My name is Dr. Luther Smith, and you are watching the Majestic Talks Show, and on YouTube, and I think on Facebook Live. And I'm not your host, but I'm the guest, as our host is I think doing some things in the background, getting some things together. So while she's doing that, why don't I just go ahead and jump in and talk a little bit about some of the projects that I've been working on concerning counseling and things like that. I've neglected to mention that I have worked on a couple of books.
All right, there we go. Um,
Hi, I just
and
continued
I
to talk.
now I can't even hear you.
Oh, now you can't hear me. Oh, it's on.
All right, there you go.
Okay. I don't know how
Um,
my mic got muted, but it was muted.
yeah, I couldn't hear anything you were saying. I couldn't even see or hear myself. Okay,
Okay.
go
Well, we're
ahead.
live. We're still live, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're still tuning with us. Oh, that's too funny.
This has never happened to me, but
That's okay. That's okay. You know, it's a first time for everything. You know what I'm saying? We just roll with the punches. That's all.
yeah, we
You
sure
know?
do. So we were talking about Denise and how her eating, because of her lack of discipline, she's an incredibly disciplined woman everywhere else, but psychologically, how does hyperperformance and the suppression of our own needs create a direct path to emotional
Gotcha.
overeating?
I think I don't know if you've heard what I said before, but I'll just kind of rewind it and give you the short version. So um,
Hmm.
kind of filling in some of the physiological responses that you had added, the intense cortisol levels, the nucleus accumbens, which is, which creates that pathway. I want to add another addition to that, and that is the addition of the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of the limbic system, which is responsible for which is essentially responsible for emotive responses in the body. It's responsible for four things: fight or flight, freezing, shock, and even when a person is attracted to another person, the amygdala plays an important role in that as well. And so when a person is threatened, whether it be real or perceived, the job of the amygdala is essentially to go around all the other parts of the brain and ask them if they're okay, right? But when the person perceives that they're not okay, the amygdala fires off, and the phenomenon is the frontal lobe, which is responsible for executive functioning, thinking. Even when we pray, the frontal lobe is active. When the amygdala turns on or is activated, the frontal lobe decreases. The activity of the frontal lobe decreases. And so that combined with the explosion of hormones and things that enter into the bloodstream. We're talking cortisol, we're talking norepinephrine, we're talking epinephrine, we're talking all of these things, right, that are injected into the bloodstream that cause these physiological responses in the body, right, due to the overwhelming stress, right? Like emotional eating, it. it's understandable to talk to mention that, but I think a good specific term is stress eating, because when a person is overwhelmed and stressed out and kind of grievous in that area, that amygdala turns on, the frontal lobe shuts off, the cortisol levels and things like that end up spiking, and the one thing that they would address, that it would address that stress, is the one thing that they go to. In this case, we're talking about those who go and consume high caloric and dense foods, right?
Mm-hmm.
To relieve them of that overwhelming sense of stress and anxiousness, right? And so, um, when I think about Denise, and if she was sitting in front of me and kind of thinking about this, the first question that I would begin to start to ask is not only what the origin of it is, right? Because she may not know, right? It could have came from the family dynamic in her childhood, right? It could have came from what she believes about herself, that she may have to be perfect all the time, right? That maybe she was raised that way. Maybe she was raised with parents who told her, hey, you deal with other people's needs first. That is the way that you don't become selfish, right? You give of yourself all the time, a little piece of you at the time. You always give a little more, right? And maybe she had adopted that philosophy, and that philosophy now is overwhelming her, and she's receiving the consequences for that, right? Or it could be that she maybe was involved in a relationship, and that relationship went south, and she might feel some grief about that, right? And some stress about that. And so, in order for her to do that, she may pour herself into her work, not to remember that, but in the quiet, in the late nights, right, when there's nothing going on and no one's calling her phone and no one's blowing up her phone, no one's giving her a voicemail, right? And she is left with her own thoughts, instead of dealing with those thoughts in a real healthy and productive way and exploring those underlying feelings that are under there. She may resort to this, right? So if she was in front of me and I was talking with her, the two questions I would ask, or that I would want to ask her, is as follows: is, do you know where this came from? As well as exploring her family dynamics and maybe possibly some of the things that she's adopted, some of the thought process and patterns that she's adopted along the way. That would be part of that first question. The second question I would ask is, what are your what are the triggers, right? That influence you to want to consume these high caloric foods. What are some of the triggers that you experience, right? And what are some of the thoughts behind those triggers that you experience, right? That would be the area that I would, the first two questions I would want to ask her, to begin to start to explore and unpack this challenge.
Okay, so why do you think Denise is standing up eating in the dark? And what is the clinical relationship between hen eating behaviors and the deep seated shame that follows?
Mm. Well, I mean, as a counselor, right, we can look at things multifaceted, right? We could just look at the fact that it's late at night and there's no one to serve, right? And so as she is, trying to rest, right? All of this stress floods back because now there's no one else to help, right? And so now she is left in the quiet with her own thoughts, as I mentioned previously, right? If I were to take kind of a symbolic gesture, whenever we do things shamefully, we do them in the quiet when no one's around, right? We do them in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And so this could be something that not only that she is feeling the sense of the shame and the guilt of the action that is getting ready to take place, right? Because she has the lights off. She, know everybody's asleep, or she's the only one that's there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that there might be a connection to the dark of her hiding, right? Not wanting people to see her consume this, right? Um, there's also the fact that you mentioned that she is hyper. I think you said, was it hyper helpful?
Hyper
Uh,
performance, yeah.
Hyper performance, right? So we might be talking about a woman who is not only ashamed of her eating, but it could be connected to the fact that she doesn't ask for help for anyone,
Mm-hmm.
and she helps everyone, but no one helps her, right? And so by her doing this, she may be convinced that she may be helping herself, which is counterintuitive, right? Because if she felt like that, then why is she ashamed of doing this, right? Knowing that she is, doing this in the dark, right? So there's a whole bunch of facets we can kind of go along, and again, if I was in front of Denise, I would begin as a counselor, beginning, well, are you eating because you feel like this is the way that you help yourself, or are you eating and having these particular triggers because you feel like you can't, you have to be there for everyone else, you know and if you think that someone is there for you, people might perceive you as weak or inadequate
Mm-hmm.
or insufficient, right? Or less than, right? So that's what I would explore if I was in front of her. I think that would be probably the area I would go in, and then we kind of explore that.
So Denise has this unspoken rule that she does not have needs.
Mm, mm,
So she doesn't want anybody to help her, but she wants people to help her. She wants to help other
mm,
people.
mhm,
And so that is her whole makeup. That's her unspoken rule.
mhm,
She is
mhm.
not allowed to have needs.
Yeah, yeah, and a good question is, um, who told you that?
Hmm.
Where did you get that from?
And that's
Where-
one of my.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That's where I would ask her. If someone told you that you're not allowed, you hear this, you're not allowed to have needs. My question is, where did you get that from? It's kind of very similar to what God said to Adam in the garden, right? God comes
Mm-hmm.
to Adam in the garden, and he goes, Adam, where are you? Well,
Mm-hmm.
Adam kind of told on himself, right? He walks up, he goes, oh well, I was afraid
Mm-hmm.
because I was naked
Mm-hmm.
and I hid myself. Well,
Mm-hmm.
God already knew that.
Mm-hmm.
But what did he ask him? Who told you were naked? Who told you that? Right? It's almost kind of the same thing. If somebody's expressing, we all have needs. All
Mm-hmm.
of us are, somebody told me a long time ago that God is the only one that can multitask. God is the only one that is not dependent on anyone, which means that all of us who are the created are dependent, not just on Him, but on each other, which means all of us have needs, right? So if a person believes that they don't have needs, we already know that that's a lie, right? And so I would ask her, I'd be very curious. I'm curious, where did you get that from? Where did you learn that you didn't have needs, or that you were taught not to have them, right? Um, so, and particularly if she was married, do you need love? Well, of course. Well, I thought you said you didn't have any needs.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you get this from? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would begin to start to explore that. And oftentimes this comes again from the fact of, and sounds like from her perspective, she has some perfectionistic tendencies about her. And, she is, like you said, a performance driven. So her identity in some respect is wrapped up in what she completes, right? Rather than who she is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is beginning to start to express itself. It's becoming too heavy for her, right? It's overwhelming. She can only lift it up, but only for a certain time, and it gets really heavy. And so for her to decompress, she exhibits herself this way. As a matter of fact, I would probably say to her, you say that you don't have any needs. Well, do you need to eat ice cream? Well, no, I don't need to eat ice cream. Well, then what's behind the ice cream? You apparently need something, right? Because you wouldn't be up at night at 11:30 in the quiet, nobody around, eating this ice cream. So would you would you be willing to consider that there is something that you need, even though you're convincing yourself that there's nothing that you need?
All right, that's good. That's good. That is good. So let's continue, okay? Because there's a question I was going to ask you. How do childhood environments where a child was only praised for being strong or low maintenance prime an adult to use food as their solitary comfort?
That's a great question too, because this goes back into family dynamics, right? And I believe that the scripture talks about this. We see this in Genesis 1, the foundation of the family, and how the child, when they grow up, the main model that they have is the family unit, right? The speaking and the actions and activity. Now, there's nothing wrong with celebratory eating, right? This is a part. I believe that this is not only a part of our culture, but this is a part of humanity. We see this in every culture, right? Where food becomes the center focus of fellowship. Food becomes the center focus of family gatherings, of interactions, and things like that. However, when one begins to start to attach performance with identity, for us as believers, as I mentioned before, our identity is not wrapped in our performance, right? Our identity is wrapped from the fact that we are believers. We are believers in Christ, and we get our worth from what God declares, right? What God says about us, not from what we do, right? And so when you have a family system that is performance driven, maybe, and it can go either way. Maybe the family unit is maybe mom and dad are both kind of overachievers, right? And they want their children, they want the best for their children, right? And so they encourage them, they string them along. Come on, son, you can do this, and if you complete this, you'll get this treat. You know what I'm saying? Or if you do this, we might take you out to this eatery or this diner or whatever, right? That could be a source of how this could be produced, particularly in a perfectionistic family system, right? But the opposite is also true too, right? If you live in an abusive household, right, and or a neglectful household, we find too, in some respects, that a lot of individuals, a lot of children who are neglected, do you know that they hoard food? They hoard food sometimes, right? Because they don't know when their next meal is going to come, right? And so, it depends on um, the perception of the child, how the child develops and grows, how they assess and see themselves, right? And how over time, if they don't process that, how that comes out. And in some respects, that comes out by overeating and stress eating, right? If even if in a good family, in the family dynamic, if they don't teach their young one how to process emotions properly, or maybe they, like we mentioned at the beginning, right, they see emotions as a negative, right? Something that is meant to be slayed, right? An enemy, a foe, right? Rather than something that informs us about where we are. And that can also be a risk of a person that might stress eat too, because they were never able to express their feelings in a productive, meaningful, healthy way. So, there's all sorts of facets that go with that.
All right, that's good. I hope people are listening so that they could help them. I'm glad that you're here so that you can help somebody that's listening. And I hope they're listening so that they can change. I mean, I'm listening, and those will get good. It's really good. It's something good to listen to because I want, like I said, I always want people to change and move from where they are, and that's what we're here for. So let's move into section two. Where are we now? So we have to address the landscape we're currently surviving in. We are living through an unprecedented economic of sensory and emotional overload. So we have this story about, well, before we do the story, let's talk about this. By 6 o'clock p.m., the average modern adult has made thousands of micro decisions under high stress. The prefrontal cortex, like you talked about, the part of the brain responsible for logical reasoning, future planning, and executive control, is completely offline due to depletion. We are operating entirely out of our emotional primitive brain. Marcus is our next story. Marcus is 42, an incredibly successful corporate executive, a faithful husband, a deacon, and a man of unshakable integrity. He is a protector, but Marcus has been carrying a quiet, low grade depression for 2 years. He feels an immense, crushing weight to maintain his family's lifestyle, to keep his marriage seamless, and to never show a single crack in his armor. Boy, that sounds just like African American people on it.
That is true.
Every evening on his commute home, Marcus pulls into a drive-through. He orders a large, heavy combo meal. He sits alone in his parked car in a vacant lot 3 minutes away from his house, windows rolled up, eating in a total silence. He isn't hungry. In fact, he knows his wife has a beautifully prepared, healthy dinner waiting for him inside. But in that car, under the dim glow of the dashboard lights, Marcus is numbing the profound empty exhaustion of his day. The fast food acts like an anesthesia for the pressure. He finishes the meal, disposes of the evidence in a commercial dumpster, chews a piece of mint gum. Oh my God, he's trying to make sure nobody knows that he ate that for.
They ain't gonna hide them onions.
I don't know, that might be some real good gum
Yeah,
though.
maybe.
He's using it as anesthesia and walks through his front door to sit down for a second dinner with his family. He looks whole on the outside, but inside he is starving for an emotional release laugh. So, Dr. Luther, I know we just laughed at Marcus, but Marcus represents so many men, particularly men of faith, who believes that expressing vulnerability, and I can't talk today, or emotional exhaustion is a sign of weakness. So, how does the cultural pressure on men to just carry it directly manifest in secret addictive patterns with food, like Marcus?
This can be a whole episode in and of itself, Latasha. So, we're talking a multifaceted challenge here, right? And I'll try to break this down as I see it, as my mind is kind of working as best I can. So, first of all, there is the organic aspect. You mentioned that he has depression, low grade depression, for 2 years. This could be what is known as, this could be possible, it could be persistent depressive disorder, which is formerly known as dithymia. Okay, this is not major depressive disorder, and where you have an intense, heavy emotional response, right? This is a low grade in the background, right? And I find it fascinating that the duration of time is 2 years. So we could be looking at something organic that could possibly be impacting him. Now, that's not to say that's a 100% lock, but that could be something that that could be running, kind of, looking at kind of his symptomology here. The second thing is the cultural referent that you mentioned, particularly with men. Men, particularly when they've grown up in society in the West, men are not supposed to cry. Men are not supposed to experience feelings. Men are supposed to suck it up, pull it up by their
Mm-hmm.
bootstraps. Men, not just men expect this, but women expect this too. Um, you know, um, you know, uh, maybe particularly in single parent households, right? Who is, when their dad's not there, and the mother has a son, the mother looks to the son, whether knowingly or unknowingly, to be the man of the house, right? To take charge, particularly if they have brothers and sisters. And if you're the oldest one, you're the heavy, you're the
Mm-hmm.
example. You're supposed to stand out. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to do it, right? So I think that within our culture, particularly in our culture, this is something that is permeated. Kind of the thought, right? That emotions, we don't have time for that, right? Particularly these men, right? And then add again the collective ideology of the fact that emotions are the enemy, and stuff like that. And then add the church dynamic. As good as the church is, and I believe that we're addressing this issue, the church itself at large has not been very intentional in giving a good response to emotions, right? And so he's the deacon in his local church. I'm sure that there have been teachings and things like that. It could be, well, if you're having an overwhelming sense of feelings and emotions, it could be the devil, it could be the world at large pressing in on you, it could be this, that, and the other. Well, you got to fight through that, you got to work through that, you got to do this, that, and the other. You got to, and not to mention the example of being a deacon, a leader at his local church. He probably perceives that he's scrutinized all the time, that he's under a
Mm-hmm.
microscope, right? That people put their assurance in him, that he is the anchor for all of these issues that he's dealing with, right? That other people are dealing with, that he's dealing with. So we have all of these particular things that are pressing in on him. Perhaps the organic nature of dysthymia, the culture of possibly how he grew up, and what and the societal pressure, the cultural pressure that's been put on him. The fact that he is a leader at his local church and people are relying on him to be strong, and things like that. Maybe even the pressures of his family, and some of those things, right? And the fact that he cannot express himself, you know, in a way that is healthy for him. He deals with the next best thing that is acceptable in his sight, and that is to go and eat,
Mm-hmm.
and engage in this eating, and then go home and do the same thing. So I would say that's I would wonder if I'm in front of him, all of those things would be kind of rumbling in my mind as he's telling me this in front of me.
How can a spouse or loved one recognize the subtle warning signs that someone they love is using food to quietly medicate their depression or anxiety?
That's kind of hard to spot because, again, as we mentioned before, usually these individuals do it in the quiet, right? They're very
Mm-hmm.
intentional about this and stuff like that. I think one of the best things that we can do as spouses, or what spouses can do, is to check in on their spouses and go, and not just check in like, hey, how are you doing, right? But maybe even notice, for example, you might like the way that an individual may talk about themselves. So, if you try to compliment a person and they don't take the compliment, or they downplay themselves, oh, well, I'm kind of a nobody, or something like that, right? Those indicators, because usually shame and guilt comes in more than one form, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not just in the fact that it's in the eating, but it's in the fact in the thinking and the talking and the responding and things like that, right? Another thing too is to ask, the spouse can ask too, you're helping everybody, but who's helping you, right? Self-care for the practitioner, irrespective of whether they are a counselor or a pastor or a deacon, is important.
Mm-hmm.
So who are you, how are you caring for yourself? How is your stress level? How are you dealing with your stress? How are you dealing with your anxiousness, right? And to reaffirm, the spouse reaffirming, I'm asking these things because I'm concerned about you. I want you to be healthy, because you're important to me, not just because of what you do, right? But because of who you are, who you are to me. You're my husband, you're my lover, you're my confidant. I love you, right? And so I think being aware of those things, being aware of the talking about themselves, being aware of, them taking on responsibilities, even at the expense of the family, right? So they may miss family gatherings, family functions, right? Because they feel that they have to take care of this, otherwise it's not going to get done,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being aware of that, being aware of them getting up late night, right? You wake up and your spouse isn't right next to you. Where are they? Going in and checking on them, right? Seeing what they're doing, those sorts of things, right? And of course, encouraging them, and just being a support to them and asking them, who you're helping everybody, who's helping you, who is your pressure valve, right? Besides me, right? Who are you looking to? Who is encouraging you? Who's building you up? Who's strengthening you? Who are you able to give? Who is able to counsel you, right? And that's very, very important.
Okay, that is good. That's good because we don't always recognize those little subtle things. And we always look at, like I said, the men in a way, we always look at them as the hero. And and black people always looked at as the strong people, but we always look at our men as someone that's very, very strong, right? They're supposed to be, like I said, our protector, our hero. And so we don't always want to see that there's something wrong going on. But I think we just have to be mindful that even though they're considered to be the man, the strong one, they're still human. And nobody's God but God.
Hmm. Yeah.
So let's keep going and let's move on to the next section where we talk about how can we heal and grow and move forward from where we are right now. So I have that last story for you so that you can see how it looks. But first we're going to talk about this because, see, I refuse, and I'm sure you refuse, Dr. Smith, to leave the people with the problem and in the problem. So, the goal of the Majestic Talk Show is always practical, actionable deliverance. Healing does not look like another restrictive diet plan, it looks like radical self awareness and spiritual alignment. The practical compassion framework is what we're going to use to help you tonight. The 90-second rule. Now, neurologically, an emotional wave or craving lasts approximately 90 seconds from the moment it is triggered to the moment it begins to dissipate. If we do not feed it with looping thoughts, if we can create a 90-second buffer of deep breathing or somatic grounding, the neurological urgency shifts. So the HALT check in. Before opening the pantry, viewers must implement the psychological pause and ask yourself, am I hungry? Am I angry, lonely, or tired? Shifting that restriction to your daily rhythm. So, here's our story. We're going to talk about another woman, and that's Angela. So, for years, Angela thought she just possessed zero self control around Italian food and baked goods. Now, those foods are good now. Rich, but good. Every single time she had an uncomfortable boundary crossing phone call with her highly critical mother. Oh, that can be problematic. No, no, I'm honest gone. But anyway, Angela would find herself on a food delivery app ordering comfort food. It was an automated reflex. But 3 months ago, Angela decided to stop treating herself like a criminal and start treating herself like a student of her own life. The next time her mother called and left a cutting comment about Angela's life choices, Angela felt that familiar, urgent pull to order food. But instead of picking up her phone, she stood still. She closed her eyes. She noticed that her throat felt incredibly tight and her chest felt compressed. She realized, am I not hungry? I am not hungry. I am deeply hurt and I feel incredibly unprotected. So she sat down on her living room floor, wrapped her arms around herself, took 5 deep belly breaths, and allowed herself to cry for 3 minutes. She didn't order the food. She didn't need the food anymore because she finally felt the hurt. And she sat in that and was present with it instead of pastries. She healed the moment instead of feeding it. So, Dr. Luther Smith, what do you think about Angela's and how Angela's breakthrough started with what psychologists call somatic tracking, paying attention to where emotion lives in the physical body?
I think that that is a fantastic technique. That is a fantastic technique, and it is a fantastic way to deal and manage those emotions in a healthy way. And there's a couple of indicators there too. For one, the fact that she was aware of what she was feeling. And oftentimes when emotional eating begins with the phrase that often comes up is, I don't know why I do this, right? There is an agnosia, a lack of knowing, a lack of insight when it comes to a person that hasn't really thought about it. They've just responded to the emotional, stress, of the stress eating. So the fact that she was aware of it, which is really the first, the first thing that you want is to gain awareness of it, right? To understand what your body is doing, right? Another thing too is the fact that she did not judge herself for having these emotional responses. And that's another layer. Oftentimes in counseling, I teach non judgmental thinking, that your emotions are not good nor bad. Neither are your thoughts either. If you feel overwhelmed, that's just your body telling you that something might be going on that you might want to explore. But if you assume that it is bad, you will try to avoid it at all costs. This woman who is in front of me has not done that. She has taken the physiological responses that she feels and she is analyzing. I feel my throat tightening, my chest getting tight. I feel that, right? So her analyzing that and doing it from an area of non-judgment. She's just looking at the symptoms as they are. She's not equating a value to them. That is extremely important. And then her her sitting down and hugging herself and crying. Again, this is a woman who has been taught that her feelings are neither good nor bad, that she can express them in a manner that is best for her. And she also recognizes the source too. After she talks with her mom, who's very critical of her, we see again the actual need, that she has a need to be loved and accepted. That's what she wants from her mom. She's not getting it.
Hmm.
And to grieve that process, to grieve that reality, right? To grieve that for 3 minutes, right? The problem is not the food. The problem is the pain that she is experiencing. She's allowing herself to do that. And again, doing it in a way that is non-judgmental, right? That it is not bad. You're not less than, you're not less of a person, you're not less of a woman, you're not less of anybody. This is the way that you deal with emotions healthy and wholly. And I think that her her particular technique is just amazing. And the fact too that she's again reinforcing, she's building cognitive strength by doing this, because usually when we try to avoid feelings and stuff like this, our bodies want to get well. They want like when you get a cut, we take for granted that our bodies really, they heal themselves. When we cut, we don't have to force ourselves to heal. The cuts heal by themselves. Well, think of strong, intense emotions as an inner cut. And the way that our cut heals inwardly is we begin to acknowledge them and process them. If we don't, our body goes, um, this is not good for us. It's going to come out some other way, right? Either by projection or, self-destructive behavior, or, getting offended when there really isn't a need to be, or whatever the case is, right? And so for her to sit down and do that is for her to process that pain and the tears that come with that pain. And over time, that will subside, because that's what the body does. The body wants her to get well. The body works for her as well as her emotions. So I think it's a fantastic, fantastic, fantastic tip, fantastic tool.
So, but going back to the fact that Angela allowed herself to cry instead of eat, why are the tears more biologically effective than the stress reliever, of a stress reliever than the dopamine-driven comfort foods?
I think because oftentimes when we use a tool and that tool is used, it allows other things to come out that we haven't been able to deal with, right? And so that tool gives us the freedom to actually open up and actually deal with the issue in a meaningful way, right? And in a way that is safe, right? We've talked about this. We've mentioned this a couple of times, Latasha, during this session. That again, it's emotional eating, but emotional eating is really the catalyst for something deeper, right? And so the food isn't really the issue. The food is just the mechanism. It's kind of the bridge, right, to the actual issue. But when and so when a person uses emotional eating, it's almost kind of like they're diverting that pain. You know what I'm saying? They're diverting it, right? And again, we do this with a whole bunch of things. We do this with overconsumption of alcohol. We do this with promiscuous activity. We do this in any attempt to try to avoid pain at all costs. Even if avoiding pain over time even if dealing with pain over time may help us, all we do is we don't want to feel those feelings. We don't want to feel those feelings. We don't want to feel that reality, right? Because it's too painful, right? But when we replace that food and put in another tool, that gives the body kind of the green light to go, okay, we're not turning to food. We're not turning away from this. We're not rejecting this. Okay, now we can really deal with this now, right? And that opens up things that opens up a whole new wave of emotion. So that, I believe, that's why the tears are there, because the tears were being mitigated by the food intake, right? But once you move that away and the person begins to start to deal with it and walk through that pain, that's when we begin to start to see the welling up of that physiological response, that crying. And I think that's what's happening, right?
Okay, yeah. Makes sense. That's good. Yeah. It often helps to sit in the pain instead of masking it because it's going to show up somewhere, somehow, and in
Right,
some way.
right.
Um, so what role does authentic spiritual community and real unmasked accountability play in keeping us consistent when we hit an emotional relapse?
Hmm. Hmm. That's a great, great question, because that often happens, right? We don't bat 300 all the time, and sometimes we deal with situations and painful situations and stuff like that, and they end up coming back and rearing their ugly head some from time to time. The faith that is faith within the Christianity is extremely, extremely important. There's one word that we use all the time, and we sometimes take it for granted, but but it is very, very important in terms of what we believe as Christians, and that is the word grace. Grace, unmerited favor, right? As a matter of fact, the scripture tells us in various places, but one particular in Titus, Titus chapter 2, it tells us that the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us to deny ungodliness and live righteously, sensibly, and godly. So it is the grace, the saving grace of God that has appeared to men. That is Christ, right? And so understanding that there is no shame in relapse, particularly if you are a believer in Christ, that God understands the weakness of men, and that's not a bad thing. That sometimes we're going to have periods of peaks and valleys, right? And the most important thing is that you understand that you ought to, from the grace that you have given by Christ, that gracing yourself, realizing that's okay. You haven't taken a step back. As a matter of fact, I tell counselees this. It's not like a board game, right? When you make a mistake, you go back to the first square on the board. That's not how this works, right? Um, um, God, God does not seek perfection because you can't supply that by your activity. You're going to fail. God has to supply that. So if God has supplied it in Christ, what does He want? He wants you to be intentional, right? So if you relapse, that's okay, right? Reset, readjust. As a matter of fact, I tell my counselees all the time that, if you, let's say you fail or you relapse, look at the win. Hey, I was 10 minutes it took me to relapse. Now it's 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That's progress. Let's try for 2 minutes next time. You know what I'm saying? So you know, uh, uh, the perspective of grace gives us the ability not to fail. We're always going to fail, but gives us the ability to be intentional in our progress. Another thing too is one of the things that is interesting again is um, feelings and emotions are not bad. And one of the books that I think is fantastic for this is the Psalms. The Psalms are a collection of prayers, but they are a collection of prayers that are written with raw emotion, raw grief, raw promise, but raw tears. Sometimes you can even feel the tears, depending on the psalm that you're reading. You can feel the tears on the page as they were writing it, right? Some of them are very candid with God, but every psalm ends essentially with praising God and His grace and loving kindness. Even when they're wrestling with God in this, God, can't you hear me? What are you doing? Have you left me? Have you abandoned me? This is, things like that, right? And every single psalm that is written, but God, you're faithful, you're loving, kind, you're gracious. And these psalters are not doing this because they're forced to, but they're doing it because they understand that God is gracious and His nature is gracious, and it is expressed that way. So I think our faith is extremely important in understanding that yes, we're going to fail. That is reality. But at the same time, too, understanding that God is not seeking perfection. You can't supply that, right? That He's seeking for us to be intentional. So live in that grace, and again, don't evaluate your feelings and your failure, or your relapse as something that is negative. Take that and learn from it and look at what the positive that comes out of that. Well, I did it in 10 minutes now. I relapsed in 5. I'm learning. I'm growing. And that's an important thing. So,
All right. So, our last question for tonight, for the person that's listening or will listen later, And they're saying to them, saying, look, Dr. Smith, look, Latasha, I've been doing this for 25 years. I don't think that I can change now. What would you say to that person?
Hmm. You can't change. Well, first of all, I would say that if we are created in God's image, we are created to learn. And if we are created to learn, irrespective of what that is, we are created for change. And so I don't think that the change is the issue. I would say to this person who says, "Well, I can't change." Well, I would ask you the question, what if you can? What would it look like? How would you feel? What would you be doing if you could change? What if God came to you tonight and said, I'm going to remove this, and you woke up the next morning? What would you do? How would you feel? Right? What things would you be doing? What things would you think would strengthen you in this particular in this particular challenge? So I would say if you are breathing, you can change, irrespective of the age. And if you're willing, you can also change. I would say that. And I would say, if you're willing to go that step, begin to start to seek out counselors and individuals that can help you and encourage you in that aspect in that journey to change. So,
That's good. And that brings us to Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Transformation doesn't happen by changing what is on your plate. It happens by changing the way you think about your pain. It's renewing your mind to realize that God's grace is sufficient, like you said before, for your messy moments and what your worth is and that your worth is completely independent of your struggles with food. So, if you're watching tonight, I want you to know that you can change, and this is your moment. What happened yesterday, 5 minutes ago, 2 minutes ago, is the past. This is the present. And we can move forward with changing and transforming from what we used to do into what God has for us. Okay? So, Dr. Smith, tell people how they can get in touch with you.
they can find me on Facebook at The Renewed Mind. That is THERE hyphen NYOO hyphen ED mind. You can also connect with me on X at The Renewed Mind, all one word. Or you can also reach out on Instagram, TikTok, and Lord's Book, which is kind of a derivative of Facebook, at The Renewed Mind Podcast, all one word. That is at The Renewed Mind Podcast, all one word. That is spelled RENYOOED, mind. You can also reach me too at drluthersmith.org. That is my website. And you can find my podcast on Spotify or Apple Music or anywhere where you stream your podcasts. And you can find me on YouTube and Rumble as well at The Renewed Mind Podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for being here tonight. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I love the nuggets that you shared tonight. So, thank you again. It has been a pleasure. And everyone, that's it for tonight. I'm Latasha Morgan, certified Christian life coach, certified professional life coach, board certified master Christian mental health coach, and a whole lot of other goodies. Tonight's conversation is your permission to stop hiding what hurts. Breakthrough does not begin when you get your habits perfect. Breakthrough begins the moment you dare to be honest. Thank you again for watching the Majestic Talk Show. I'll talk to you again next month.